Donald Trump just suffered his most brutal courtroom smackdown yet at the hands of a conservative Ronald Reagan appointed judge on the topic of free speech. This was an absolutely brutal rebuke, and we have to talk about it. But before we do, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, it's important to remember that Donald Trump is objectively the greatest threat to free speech in modern American history. And it's not just liberals and progressives and Democrats who say so. Very often, it is conservatives, conservative judges, Reagan-appointed conservative judges, and sometimes even Trump-appointed judges as well. This seems to be a bipartisan consensus among sane and principled people. And I want to take a look, give you an overview of what's going on. We'll actually dive into specifics as well, but let's look at an overview courtesy of CBS News. Judge finds Trump administration unconstitutionally targeted pro-Palestinian students in searing rebuke. A federal judge in Massachusetts ruled Tuesday that Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem and Secretary of State Marco Rubio violated the First Amendment by targeting pro-Palestinian students for deportation in order to strike fear into international students and curb lawful speech. In a 161-page decision, U.S. District Judge William Young delivered a blistering assessment of the Trump administration's efforts to pursue international students who expressed pro-Palestinian views on college campuses, which he said was constitutionally protected speech. The judge, appointed by President Ronald Reagan, was unsparing not only in his views of Noem and Rubio's actions, but also of Donald Trump, who he says approves of, quote, truly scandalous and unconstitutional suppression of free speech on the part of two senior administration officials. Quote, the president's palpable misunderstanding that the government simply cannot seek retribution for speech he disdains poses a great threat to Americans' freedom of speech, he wrote. So again, very clear, a conservative Reagan-appointed judge, and Reagan was the proto-Trump in the sense that he was also from Hollywood, an actor, right? Just like Donald Trump was a reality TV show star. And Reagan was the closest modern Republican president outside of Trump to ever generate a cult of personality. President Bush never got even close to that. It was Ronald Reagan's party until it became Donald Trump's party, okay? Reagan appointed this guy, and this guy saying Donald Trump poses a great threat to free speech. Of Noem and Rubio, as well as other administration officials, Young wrote that they, quote, acted in concert to misuse the sweeping powers of their respective offices to target non-citizen pro-Palestinians for deportation, primarily on account of their First Amendment-protected political speech, and did so through targeted deportation proceedings aimed at pro-Palestinian student activists across the country, which, quote, continues unconstitutionally to chill freedom of speech to this day. The judge issued his decision after holding a 9-day trial that examined whether the administration had violated the free speech rights of academic associations that sued the Trump administration for arrests, detention, and deportations of foreign students and faculty who participated in pro-Palestinian demonstrations. Young praised the witnesses who testified on behalf of the government, saying of them that they were, quote, decent, credible, dedicated, nonpartisan professionals, true patriots who, in order to do their duty, have been weaponized by their highest superiors to reach foregone conclusions for most ignoble ends. But he accused Rubio and Noem of acting with, quote, invidious intent to, quote, to target a few for speaking out and then using the full rigor of the Immigration and Nationality Act in ways it had never been used before to have them publicly deported with the goal of tamping down pro-Palestinian student protests and terrorizing similarly situated non-citizen and other pro-Palestinians into silence because their views were unwelcome, end quote. Young further chastised the Trump administration for deploying masked agents to detain students like Tufts University doctoral student and Turkish native Remizia Ozturk, who was taken into custody by masked plainclothes immigration authorities in March and spent more than a month and a half in federal immigration custody before lawyers secured her release from detention. Quote, this court has listened carefully to some of the reasons given by Ozturk's captors for masking up and has heard the same reasons advanced by the defendant Todd Lyons, acting director of ICE. It rejects this testimony as disingenuous, squalid, and dishonorable. ICE goes masked for a single reason, to terrorize Americans into quiescence, Young wrote. Quote, to us, masks are associated with cowardly desperados and the despised Ku Klux Klan. In our history, we have never tolerated an armed, masked secret police. Holy shit, folks, this is brutal. The judge also responded to a threat sent to his chambers, putting the anonymous threat and his response at the top of the opinion, an unusual, rare move. And this is it right here. So this is an unusual opinion in so many respects. This was a postcard sent to his chambers. Trump has pardons and tanks. What do you have? A threat by Trump supporters saying, hey, listen, the executive has all the functional power. He has the military, he has law enforcement, and then he has the pardon power to forgive violations of law by people whom he gives unlawful orders. He can give nefarious, unlawful orders to the military and to law enforcement officers to terrorize whomever they want, and then he can pardon them. What can you, a judge, do in response? So Trump has pardons and tanks. What do you have? Says the postcard, dated June 19th and written by hand. Young responds that, quote, alone, I have nothing but my sense of duty. Together, we the people of the United States, you and me, have our magnificent Constitution, he writes before delivering his opinion in the case. At the end of his opinion, Young again wrote to the person who sent the anonymous threat. Quote, I hope you found this helpful. Thanks for writing. It shows you care. You should. Unbelievable. While Young concluded that Noem and Rubio acted unconstitutionally, chilled the free speech rights of pro-Palestinian students by targeting them for deportation, he ended his decision with a searing rebuke of Trump and the changes to the executive branch he has ushered in since returning to the White House in January. Noem has not yet responded to a request for comment, and Rubio has also not yet responded to a request for comment. Young accused Trump of, quote, hollow bragging and said he, quote, ignores everything from the Constitution to civil laws to regulations only to continue, quote, bullying on. Given that Trump is immune from prosecution, the judge said the president is prepared to deploy, quote, all the resources of the nation against obstruction. Quote, behold President Trump's successes in limiting free speech. Law firms cower, institutional leaders in higher education meekly appease the president, media outlets from huge conglomerates to small niche magazines mind the bottom line rather than the ethics of journalism, Young wrote. In July, and it goes into some of the details about Paramount, for example, settling their bullshit lawsuit over the fake Kamala Harris interview, or ABC. The judge says Trump, quote, meets dissent from his orders in those other two branches by demonizing and disparaging the speakers, sometimes descending into personal vitriol, calling those who he likes, quote, traitors. But Young praises the judiciary for rebuffing the Trump administration in its efforts to infringe on the First Amendment rights of those he dislikes, from law firms who challenge executive orders targeting them, to universities like Harvard that have been punished by the administration, to news outlets like the Associated Press. Quote, I fear President Trump believes the American people are so divided today that they will not stand up, fight for, and defend our most precious constitutional values so long as they are lulled into thinking their own personal interests are not affected, Young writes in closing. Quote, is he correct? Damn. Young was appointed by Reagan to the federal bench in 1985 and called the case involving the Trump administration's efforts to punish pro-Palestinian activists, quote, perhaps the most important to fall within the jurisdiction of his court. Folks, this is stunning. This is stunning. Again, we'll just go through this real quick. Judge William Young, a Reagan appointee, delivers the most scathing legal rebuke of the Trump era, ruling that Trump and his cabinet illegally targeted pro-Palestinian students for deportation to strike fear into First Amendment protesters. The ruling itself is remarkable, but it closes with something I've never seen, a 12-page assessment of Trump himself as an ignorant bully, braggart, and threat to free speech and the Republic writ large. And again, Kyle Cheney is a Politico senior legal affairs reporter. Judge Young described the Trump administration's crackdown on pro-Palestinian academics as a brazen effort to chill the free speech of non-citizens and to use the state to punish speech the president opposes. Jesus. Aaron Reichenmanek, who's somebody I follow, he posted, it's a post-by-post breakdown of this entire opinion. I gasped when I saw the front page of his decision. Judge Young includes a postcard sent to him again asking, Trump has pardons and tanks. What do you have? Let's see. The case squarely presents the issue of whether non-citizens lawfully present here in the United States have the same free speech rights as the rest of us. This court answers this constitutional question unequivocally, yes, they do. No law means no law. Judge Young, quote, finds by clear and convincing evidence that Kristi Noem and Marco Rubio deliberately and with purposeful afterthought took actions, quote, intentionally to chill the rights and freedom of speech and peacefully assemble of the non-citizen plaintiffs. Young begins the meat of his opinion by praising ICE and state officers he had on the stand. Again, we went through that. The intent of the secretaries was more invidious to target a few for speaking out and use the full rigor of their positions to have them publicly deported with the goal of terrorizing similarly situated non-citizens into silence. Again, we read that. Continuing to review the facts, Young offers a pessimistic view of the current state of American law and immigration enforcement. He begins by declaring that the Secretary's intent of terrorizing non-citizens into silence, quote, succeeded. I agree. Young finds that Trump did not order Rubio and Noem to violate free speech, but fully supported them. The DOJ represents the president, and Congress is occupied with other matters. Young says there will be no meaningful public outcry to what Rubio, Trump, and Noem did because he believes the American public has bought into a false vision of ICE as our, quote, principal criminal law enforcement agency. Young thinks the admin's, quote, worst of the worst rhetoric is meaningless but effective and clarifies immigration enforcement is civil, not criminal law enforcement. Wow. ICE goes mass for a single reason, to terrorize Americans into quiescence, which we talked about. He concludes the First Amendment equally protects citizens and lawfully present non-citizens, meaning their speech was protected. Justice in the Trump era. That's the 16-page breakdown of Donald Trump. Again, he ignores everything. What is indubitably true. A huge swath of people find this refreshing in ways they feel is an over-regulated society. After all, lawyers seem to have a penchant for telling you what you can't do. Trump simply ignores them. Trump seems to be winning. He ignores everything and keeps bullying ahead. He seems to be winning, noting that Trump has fully succeeded in enacting change. This is a blistering thing, folks. He keeps bullying on. He seeks warm cheering and gladsome welcoming acceptance of his views. He'll settle for sullen silence and obedience. But, quote, what he will not countenance is dissent or disagreement. Jeez. All right, folks, that was a conservative Reagan appointee pointing this out about Donald Trump. This is, again, we'll probably get Pisco on, friend of mine, friend of the show, Live and Learn co-host who's a lawyer, to break this down further still. This is the most blistering attack on Trump, critique of Trump by a federal judge that I've seen, and it comes from a conservative Reagan appointee. And this is absolutely humiliating for anybody who claims to be a principled defender of free speech and also a Trump supporter, to see that this is just evidently not the case. Trump is objectively the greatest threat to free speech in modern American history. And when you're hearing that from a Reagan appointee, you know you can take it to the bank. In the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.